working on your product visions and your definitions for that class, ask him questions. And he happens to hold a bachelor's degree from Stanford, that other school. Okay. So with that, I'd like to let you just take it on. Okay?
Great, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here talking with you today. What I wanted to do was share a few shifts that are happening in the technology industry and a few ways that I've looked at it and that many people are thinking about platforms and the evolution of developing applications and how it affects the business. And what I wanted to start off with was the first part is just talking about a hybrid model for what people are doing for compute. And the idea is, there are a couple things people do. So one is you can go to Amazon Web Services, right, completely outside your data center and get compute storage, a lot of infrastructure, and most startups are starting out doing creating applications using that kind of technology. On the other side of the spectrum is the traditional large enterprises, right, that have huge install bases and lots of systems, and after 20 years they have a lot of different disparate stovepiped applications, and they aren't anytime soon really looking at how do I go run all of this data and all of this processing in some Amazon cloud. And yet what it represents is what the cloud really is enabling is automation, right? Agility, fast time to market, the ability to experiment, the ability to scale up, and they still want those attributes in their own development shops. Within any company, people want to be able to execute quickly, but when you get into lots of spaces, you just have the reality of what about data privacy? What about my data? What about not being dependent on somebody else? So there's this view of I want an internal private cloud, right? So external cloud and private cloud. And what I wanted to do was show you a model of why I actually think what's inevitable is a hybrid model. Right now there are a lot of infrastructures that are out there. There's IBM's investing billions of dollars, right? Amazon is investing billions of dollars in cloud. HP, VMware, Cisco. When you get that many industry players investing billions and billions of dollars, you're forming a whole new layer of technology capability. It's one of these shifts that's going on, but it's not. What I think is going to happen is a hybrid model. And let me walk through why. So what this is a graph of a kind of anonymized workload happening in part of eBay Inc. And what you see here is the spikes are daily peak hours, right? So we've got the U.S. wakes up, and international wakes up, and people do their activities, and then at night they finish up, and the server workloads go down. But what you see is that line right here up at the top, that's our fixed cost, because we need to build up enough data center capacity and compute capacity that we could handle an outage at the peak hour, right? So let's say one of our data centers goes down. We need to be able to have the compute workload still continue to process, and lots of people have this problem. So there are things people can do to get a little more energy efficient. Ideally, you would just pay for what you use, right? That's the dream, that we just pay for compute as we need it, and we don't pay all that excess. And there are a lot of things you can do, and you can go into your data center and you can get some more productivity and efficiency, increase your temperature of the data center, lower some of your costs, maybe performance optimize your applications. And then maybe you start doing some creative things like shutting down servers at night or moving workloads around. Like, for example, here's an example. We still have excess capacity even if we went down there. So you look at these peaks that poke up, and they're really the ones that drive it. So we do some things like, well, what if we take these peaks and shift workloads around, right? Let's move them to run at night. And so that would actually lower the capacity that we need. But you still really get a bigger bang if you could, let me back up. What I'm doing there is saying, what if you could actually take some of these other peaks and run them, you only need them periodically, what if we could run that on a pay by the hour model or pay by the minute model? Look at what a pretty big shift that does for your capacity model. Now to do that, what I'm going to walk you through is a financial model that shows it's really compelling to do this, especially when you have a workload that varies. The more your workload varies, the more compelling this is. And a few other things before I walk through this. What I was just looking at is just compute. Didn't solve the storage and the data replication problem. Also assumed that network latency was close enough. So within a particular data center, there's some third-party data center around with the compute on demand. And then the third thing is assuming that infrastructure is common. So an application running in our data center, the infrastructure and the platform, if you will, is similar enough externally that we could just run. And the interesting thing is when you look at this from an active-active standpoint, so not just cloud bursting, but always running part of your workload in a third-party data center and some of it internally. I'll go quickly through this, but if you just think about, okay, I know my hourly demand, I can create that curve, and I know the amount of processing that a particular node can provide for me. So it's pretty easy to generate how many compute units I need and do an integral, right, over time. And then what you could start doing is then saying, okay, what if we started doing a model where we start running those compute units externally versus internally, and we have a cost model between the cost of an external compute unit versus the cost of an internal compute unit. And then you could start figuring out your total hourly cost. You can come up with models that create your costs over time. Now, let me show you. Here's an interesting chart. So there's a lot on this, so I'll just step through it. So on the right-hand side, assume this is 100% internal, and these different colored lines are my cost for a certain number of compute units, total cost for a certain workload. Coming over here, let's say I had a dial and I said, I'm going to run all my data centers processing in a third-party data center where I'm paying on a temporal by the hour basis. And then these charts are the potential cost structures to me from an operational standpoint, not capital, but my ongoing OpEx costs. So how much is going to hit my books on a quarterly basis. And then the different colors are the relative costs between internal and external. So what if it's half the cost to run externally than internally? What it shows is, hey, you should move all your workload out to a third-party data center, just mathematically. It doesn't make any sense to run anything internally. But what gets interesting is, okay, what if it's equal to, still looks compelling, what if it's 1.5 times, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, even 5 times? It's interesting. I might pay 4 times the amount for a compute unit external that's on demand as my internal compute unit. And when you hear that, you might say, oh, well, it makes sense. I should just run everything internally because you're 1/4 the cost. It's not the case. What's interesting in every scenario, even if it's significantly more expensive, all the savings that you get from not having all that excess capacity, assuming that cloud will be available when you need it, that compute, you can rely on it, you could treat it for disaster recovery, that it functions. In every case, the model says, you should really run some percentage, 30, 40, 50, 60% of your workload should be run in that third-party data center, external cloud, public cloud, if you would, and the rest should be internal. And in all of those models, you save between 25 to 50% of your operational costs by working in a hybrid model. So a lot of things have to happen in the industry to make this easier. It's going to be, I can't tell if this is going to be really easy to do in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, but my assertion is that this will happen. So it's very similar to outsourced manufacturing or other industry shifts where at first, the first early adopters had to make pretty significant investments in order to make something work. But the more people do it, the more standardized the infrastructure will be, and the more and more people will follow on because it'll just be easier, right? We could all go get a team in another city, in another country fairly easily and quickly today, but 30 years ago that wasn't the case. And in the same vein, the world is going to make this possible. We will see what's called the converged infrastructure, where I can run internally and externally. And I see the industry players are absolutely moving in this direction. So what it means to technology leaders is that we need to make sure that our applications are built to be cloud enabled. Now, obviously, for the students in the room, that's like a no-brainer, right? It's like, duh, that's what we do every day. But when you're dealing with a pretty major, multi-billion-dollar existing business, it's not an easy proposition to just say, I'm going to stop everything, I'm going to rewrite it for a cloud architecture. And then you get into this whole thing about how do you shift skills, how do you start doing this with low-risk pilots, blah, 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 blah. And it's not so easy to shift over, but especially incumbent companies have to do it, because if they don't do it, what's going to happen is much less expensive entrants are going to come up and be able to work in a more agile fashion, be able to release functionality more quickly, and be able to undercut you on costs. And it's also interesting from an industry trend. I think you'll see more and more that Microsoft will enable this. So there's Azure, and then you see them wiring in Windows Server, right, to be able to be deployed in a more complex environment that connect to the cloud. You look at things like OpenStack, which are open source, the cloud equivalent of Linux. As Linux was to the operating system, OpenStack is gaining momentum for cloud infrastructures. And I could go down the line of VMware, HP, others. People are moving in this direction. So that's one shift in thinking about how do you build things, because it absolutely drives home that infrastructure is going to become more and more of a commodity, and you're really going to drive your differentiation up the stack, if you would, to great customer products, great customer experiences. Question? Sure, absolutely.
Just a clarifying question. So if you, on the previous slide, I was a little confused. It's, you made your point about shifting peak load, and that all makes sense. And then here, the economic analysis you do, I'm not clear on the degree to which you're assuming that computing really can freely move. Clearly, if you have some computing and there's a big database,
that's right,
that is tied to moving it is very hard, whereas there are other things that are easier. So what do you assume?
So I went through them. What I assumed was I didn't solve the data problem. That this is assuming it's just compute. So that's why I did a simplified model to say I've got a compute tier, and there is a by the hour compute resource available that's close enough from a network latency standpoint that it can talk to my existing data centers. For our use case, for our applications, that's actually reasonable. We can regionally have our applications work across most of the United States. So finding something within, it depends on the application. Every application has latency issues. So some applications might be 100 miles, might be thousands of miles in other places. So I'm glad you called that out. This was a highly simplified model, but if this one works, then other ones will work and other ones will work over time. But I didn't try to solve the data problem. I think that's actually a much more complicated problem to solve. Any other questions? And that's great. I'm happy to have a dialogue.
I just had a question. Please find the microphone. Please find the microphone. Find the microphone. Just excuse me. Do you see this evolving to more of a bilateral model? In other words, if it's all commoditized, would people in your situation where you have excess capacity, why not throw it into the pool to be sold to other companies that want to buy that capacity? That would somewhat change the economic equation for how much capacity you should plan to build to.
Yeah, so the question is, if everybody can do this and it's a commodity, why wouldn't you just buy and sell it? I think effectively what will happen is there will be some big providers who just specialize in providing this. And for me as a business, it wouldn't be as cost. I would just choose not to buy as much internally and then buy and rent it versus reselling my own. I might if I get big enough, but I actually think you need to make it part of your business model, because there's so much money being poured in here, and it's going to be competitive. So while it's going to be easier and more commoditized, it's constantly going to be getting improved. So things get composted into the operating system, if you will. It's kind of like being in an OS business. So if you're in an operating system, you've got to really be investing to have the most competitive offering. And I don't think people will just do it on the side.
Just a comment on that. Thank you. I'll use this microphone. Just a comment on that. I think you're making a static assumption about the alternate cost of computing, and you're also making sort of an implicit assumption that if you and I and a bunch of other companies do this, that our peak demands are decorrelated. And that isn't necessarily true. I mean, the reason that the Amazon Elastic Cloud came into creation is because Jeff created a data center that handled his peak, and then he challenged his team to sell the excess capacity.
Right.
Right. So and it was all around holidays. So a lot of e-commerce kind of stuff is correlated. What's your thought about
so that's where I think it's going to depend on the industry. So I think that there will be decorrelated industries. So for example, our peak is during the holiday season. Intuit's peak is during tax season. Other peaks are different times of the year. So I think when you get enough different industries, you will see some of this flattening out across different areas. That's where Amazon's betting on that same thing. They have enough variable workloads across enough different areas that they can be managing that optimization, and that's where I think other companies will be doing that same thing. But they'll just have to figure out who are the companies that are compatible. Also, we have a lot of restrictions around security and government regulations and compliance. So I don't see this external workload just being public, open compute. I think it will have a lot of restrictions around it. Let's say it would only be subject to financial institutions that have compliance requirements and federal security or other international security requirements. I think that you'll find specialized cloud providers that can focus in a particular industry. Okay, the next thing is talking about the industry. So they're just looking at what's happening. Commerce is changing extremely quickly. It's a super exciting time to be in technology and in industry, given how fast everything is transforming. So, these mobile devices just really have transformed how consumers interact with the internet, how they access their information, and how they access brands as well. So they want the same experience on a mobile device as a tablet, as a web desktop, and they use them for different things, depending on the complexity of the task. So we need to make sure that our products are really able to surface through those different modalities. Televisions, right, are changing quickly. What people are doing with e-readers and games and even infrastructure and compute is rapidly changing the dynamic. And so as a company, we need to be very quick. That's where I think that agility part of what I talked about with compute on demand and these cloud services, the ability to spin up new services, the ability to have your engineering teams be able to create new solutions, but scale them very quickly is absolutely critical. And consumers are rapidly changing their expectations. So the example would be, I can walk into a coffee shop at a restaurant, and through geofencing and the security on this device in integration with the point of sale, be able to have a digital wallet transaction that maybe I don't even take it out of my pocket anymore, so I don't even pick out a card, is becoming very, very possible. And people see that. Should I click this out? And so just an example of acceleration, this is a little bit of a dated slide for confidentiality, but just we're seeing continued double and triple digit growth rates in mobile. So the workloads are shifting, the users are shifting, and it's something we have to skate to where the puck is going. So already we've changed our strategy where everything is mobile first. It wasn't that long ago where people would build a primary web application and then a mobile application on the side. We've inverted that, and we build the mobile experience first, and then the web experience is either the same thing or it's a derivative of. And so that kind of shift happens. You've got to make those pivots really, really quickly. Also, I would point out, you guys have probably already talked about this, but just think about Moore's law. The computing on this device is so much more powerful than computers I had, growing up or when I was in school. And every 18 months, this is going to get more powerful. It's going to have more storage, and it's going to have more connectivity. And what does that enable? From computer vision, voice to text, just voice recognition, and the ability to have location aware. I think we're at this just renaissance in terms of the innovation that's happening. We had a hackathon at PayPal last weekend, and I just looked at all of the people out there innovating and all the applications they were creating, and I think about 85% of them were mobile apps. And so that's where it feeds itself, right? If that's where all the innovation is happening, that's where the breakthroughs are going to happen. So you want to make sure that your products are where the users are and where the customers are going. So with that, let me talk about PayPal, and PayPal is a platform. So we're in over 190 regions, and we support over 25 currencies. And the way I think about it is that, if you were to send money to somebody, you bought something in Russia, how would you send the money? Your checks don't work. They don't have the same currency. They don't accept credit cards necessarily. And if you were trying to sell something, how would you receive payments globally? So what we've done is we've created a network, and we've drilled into every single one of these financial systems, so the banking networks in different countries, the credit card processors, different payment vehicles, and that enables somebody in country A to be able to route through this payment network to pay or receive money to anybody in one of our network countries. And when I first was starting at PayPal, I thought, okay, all these governments, they're not going to want us, right? They're going to be like, this is our sovereign banking system. Over our dead bodies, PayPal going to tap into our ACH network. And I thought that every single country would be like a fight. And what surprised me, it's exactly the opposite. We have countries begging us to come in, because what it's doing is it's elevating their citizens to be able to participate on a global playing field that they can't otherwise get. They can't get credit cards, or they can't write checks. And as a result, they have to go through intermediaries, right? So we literally have heads of countries petitioning us to come in, Jamaica, through Asia, through some of the emerging markets. And it really was a great feeling to know that actually we're helping change these people's lives, because now they can actually sell their goods directly, or they can buy something that they could never have bought otherwise. And with these mobile devices, these are rapidly penetrating those markets. So you think about the opportunity of how it's transforming their ability to get market information. What's the value of the grain that they're selling, or how much should they really be paying? They don't have to necessarily do things the way they've done them in the past. And you've probably heard the stories about currencies moving into cell phone minutes, right, as a hard currency, cell phone minutes, right? And just interesting things are emerging that are profoundly going to change the way that the world works in the future. And then, given how fast we work, we have really rapid growth. When we throw out $92 billion, we're growing really, really quickly, and that's where we need the ability to scale. That's where you look at the innovation happening, technology. You look at cloud computing, and PayPal as a company. Why we need this is right now, what you see. Just let's look at U.S. e-commerce. So we started out in online commerce, right? And with 18% of the market of a $250 billion market, where we're going is we're going offline. So if we thought this pie was big and we had a lot of challenges, we're going and we're now seeing that online and offline are blurring, right? It's coming together. When I'm in a store, I'm online, right? It's not any different. And so we're building what is the world's most new, we're building a new payment network, a global payment network. There hasn't been a new payment network since the 70s. And that's where we're going with we announced a deal with Discover Networks. We're going to be riding on top of the old rails as we're building. Rails are connectivity, it's the industry term for how you process payments through the old rails. And we're building brand new rails that can handle much richer information like coupons and incentives and my loyalty cards, as well as my digital wallet, and allow a much richer interaction between merchants and consumers. So we're going from what we thought was a pretty big pie to a much bigger pie. But then if you really think about all of U.S. Spending, we're going into a $1 trillion payment space. And so our ability to scale quickly, have super high availability, but still be an agile startup at this scale requires us to think quite differently about the technology that we're using, the infrastructure that we're going to be betting on, because you also think about our cost structures and our time to market. The credit card industry's had decades to build out the infrastructure. We've got months and years to get to this kind of scale. So that's an exciting challenge. It also keeps it fun for technologists. So I think just taking a step back, given how every single industry is being impacted by transformation, software, you've heard the term software is eating the world. I really believe that every industry is being disrupted. These new enabling technologies, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, are fundamentally changing the way people build. And there's a new crop of applications and businesses that are emerging that are going to disrupt and continue to disrupt many of the legacy players. So that you have a huge opportunity. I think right now we're going to look back on this as the golden age, given all the innovation happening and the shift happening in the way people operate. And the world's getting smaller, it's getting more connected, technology is getting easier, simpler, cheaper, and it's going to be connecting the world in a way that we just haven't seen before. So that's why it's a great opportunity to be able to take advantage of these new technologies and help the world realize that. So with that, I will pause and open the door for questions.
Hello. Yeah. So with taking PayPal to mobile and the new innovations happening, how do you think it compares and how will it play out with Square in the same domain? Because they are doing some really disruptive things in the industry. So do you see them as a potential, competitor in the market, or is it very different space for you?
So the question, great question, how do we see Square? And what I want to do is spend a minute, there's something called the MANIC model. So MANIC, it's an acronym. So merchant, what's called an acquirer, they process credit card payments for a particular merchant. There's the network, Visa, MasterCard, Discover, PayPal. There's something called an issuer, a credit card company that if you have a credit card, Bank of America or somebody's your issuer, and then there's the consumer. So the MANIC model, that the industry is built up on this existing legacy platform. And the thing that Square's doing is they're just attached to that merchant side. They're not a network, they're not an issuer, they're not an acquirer. They've got a very innovative consumer experience. But if I look at where the money is in this business, it's not in that part of the business. So I think what the opportunity is for PayPal, and there are many people now jumping into the space, is to bring the full power of our network through that channel. That's just one channel. There's a web channel, there's a mobile client channel, there's a mobile card acceptance. My phone's over there where I can accept a card. But there's a lot more value to putting your full digital wallet in there. That being said, they're an aggressive, smart startup, and they're innovating, and they're exactly just like PayPal. Just like PayPal makes Visa and MasterCard lose sleep at night. We got to make sure that there's not yet another disruptor that might innovate. And this is all about moving quickly and aggressively, and that's something that we're doing really, really quickly. So we have a,
I can turn on the mics in the audience if it's going to be mostly questions, so you should just be able to
Yeah.
use that mic.
Thank you.
All the mics are on in the audience.
You didn't address value-added tax.
Mhm.
The VAT has become a big issue in China, as you probably may. I watch Chinese channel all the time, so I know. And Baidu is a competition, etc., etc. How are you going to handle that for international transactions in all kinds of countries with different regulations?
So what we do is we're the payment processor, and we plug into all kinds of shopping carts, third-party systems. Where needed, we have some tax processing capability, but at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the merchant, the local merchant with their country, to calculate the right tax. We'll run the charge through and move the funds around, but we're not an enforcer of that, right? That's just like when you pay at your local restaurant or you're buying something in the store, Visa and MasterCard aren't in the middle of that transaction, the tax part of that just gets added to the bill. So that's depending on how well we integrate with all of those different commerce processors. And they're really the ones that are doing the tax processing.
So does PayPal have any data centers?
Repeat the question.
Yes, so we're part of eBay Inc. And so when I was in what was called the marketplaces, so ebay.com, we have global data centers for the company. PayPal has sections of those data centers that just as ours, that are ours. We are expanding and will be going more and more global with our data centers. And just an interesting things, it's a whole nother talk, but we're doing some pretty creative things to make our data centers carbon neutral and green with really innovative energy, fuel cells and other things. That's another very, very fun space. And if you may or may not know, there was a big write-up in the New York Times over the weekend just about energy efficiency in data centers. So it's another hot topic.
I have a question. How do you deal with the fraud? Fraud is like a friction for your business.
Absolutely.
How do you?
So fraud, our fraud capabilities is part of our secret sauce. So of how we can compete. We've had years now of being out exposed to the public internet, and every fraudster and globally has been trying to find little holes in our system, and it's a key part of what we're doing. I'd say that the challenge for us is false positives, right? When we have to make sure that we secure our system. So for example, let's say scenario one, there is a new person who's new in business, they're putting on a concert, right? They've never done it before, but they're an innovator, and they start selling tickets. We're processing all of that. All this money's going to this entrepreneur who isn't the greatest financial person and kind of miscalculates and can't afford it, or the band cancels and he goes bankrupt, or he or she goes bankrupt, and all those consumers are out of money. PayPal actually stands behind those transactions. So when you pay with PayPal, we're standing behind it, and we will actually reimburse those consumers. Now there can be an equally likely scenario where there's a legitimate entrepreneur who's running the business, and the pattern looks exactly the same, right? I'm a brand new merchant. Suddenly I'm getting $1 million in sales over a weekend. And for us, we start restricting those things because we don't know what that is, right? And there's no business history. This person can just come on and start processing with us. And sometimes we'll clamp those down, and those cause a lot of negative experiences for our sellers. So we're trying to get better at how do we actually manage that. But our fraud systems, to be able to do this at a global scale, is something that's unique to our business. We're able to go into shark-infested waters and issue people credit, process transactions globally that other people can't do. And that's another differentiator with Square. I think we've got lots of years of experience of doing that. We have very sophisticated fraud systems. And we're investing very heavily in big data, machine learning algorithms, new ways of thinking about fraud and fraud algorithms using those kinds of data science type activities.
Just the old startup question. CyberCash and a dozen other companies tried to make online payments and failed. Lost money, everything good. So is it innovation? Is it timing? Is it understanding the customer better? What do you think the turning point was for you guys doing something?
The turning point for us was getting network effects, right? Of you need to have that critical mass of merchants and consumers who accept the vehicle, and you've got to actually solve an existing problem or make something that's solved today easier. And so in the early days of online commerce, there really wasn't an easy mechanism for, let's call it the long tail of people to send each other money, especially globally. So there just wasn't a good vehicle. If I'm and eBay was a great vehicle for PayPal to get massive velocity, because here was this online marketplace that was growing extremely quickly, and it was bringing together inexperienced buyers and sellers together who were sending each other paper checks. So there you had your business problem, right? Of I don't want to get a bunch of checks, and I need to get this payment, and we just made it much easier. And so that gave us the first network effect part of our business. And then once you've got that, suddenly we expanded to what we call merchant services, online, just web payments, and then it just fed itself. So it's critical to get that first problem that gives you some momentum in your business. And we were fortunate to be able to find that.
Was it insight or just timing?
Well, I wasn't there at the time, but everything I read was that it was insight. They looked at they just looked at what the customers were doing. So I don't know if you know the story of PayPal, but it started out. Has anybody used that old USR Robotics Palm Pilot, the first Palm Pilot? So PayPal started by it was trying to build encryption for Palm Pilots, and then they went to, hey, isn't this cool? We could beam money to each other through this little infrared port, and they enabled that. But they had a back door where if the person didn't have a Palm Pilot, you could just punch in their email address. And then when you synchronized that thing with your PC, it would actually talk to the backend PayPal server and send them an email saying, hey, you got some money. And the company was like, wow, 95% of our people are emailing money and they're not beaming it. Maybe we should enable that instead. So they changed their strategy and said, hey, how do we enable people to do payments through email? And then they started looking at where is it getting penetrated, and they saw in the auction business, more and more merchants were putting it on their listings saying, pay me with PayPal. And they listened to they saw what their customers were doing to the product and enabled it. Question?
So I found your comment about being welcomed by heads of state to come and boost the economy, because several years ago I was helping, affiliated with consulting to some global commerce companies. Mm-hmm. And the word of the day then was, there can never be PayPal #2, because PayPal caused banking regulations to be changed for the worse around the world, but they got grandfathered in. So something must have changed, or those people were misinformed or something. Can you say a little more about banking regulation and what PayPal did or didn't?
Well, I know we are subject to many regulations and compliance requirements globally. I think one of the interesting things was we were early enough, and everybody was kind of learning what was going on. So we opened some doors that were previously not permissible. So, for example, in the credit card industry, what we were doing was actually against the rules. So it's called factoring, where you have an entity who's processing credit cards using their merchant name on behalf of a bunch of real merchants, which is what we're doing at PayPal. We were processing the card and paying a bunch of people. And yet, just like PayPal paid attention to its customers, the credit card industry is like, well, this is really interesting. Their volumes are growing like massive. We're getting paid a lot of money. Let's see where this goes. And they ended up letting us in. And now companies like Square and others can do something that used to be against the rules. So I don't know the details of the banking regulation side of it, of what we did or didn't do. But I know in many cases it's a new industry. This didn't exist before, and so I think that regulators are also adapting to what customers want.
From a corporate structure perspective, do you end up opening PayPal companies in all these countries, being able to operate, transfer money, all kinds of things, right? Transactions.
Yeah, so the question is, how are we set up corporate-wise in all these different countries? And my answer is it depends on the regulation of the countries or the region. So what we do in EMEA is different than what we're doing in Asia. And in some countries, we have to go in and set up a special corporate entity. We're still negotiating with China, for example. So it really depends on the legal structures. But we set up whatever makes sense. Great questions. So I only have a few more minutes. But any other questions? Yeah, in the back.
How do you compare yourself with Visa? Or you compare
With Visa?
Yes.
So we're better than Visa. So one thing that I will tell you is that another thing I've learned is merchants don't like Visa at all. They hate them because I talked about that manic model, right? Merchants, acquirers, networks, issuers. The real customer of Visa and MasterCard are actually the banks. So the banks pay, and that's the relationship, and it's at the expense of the merchant. So whenever you get one of these loyalty cards, you're getting airline miles, that's really the Visa and the credit card company, the issuers, making money at the expense of the merchant. And so they've just, over the years, have come to not trust them. And that's why, just like the countries are embracing us, we're getting a huge pull from merchants because they see us as a new network. And we're not just processing payments, but we can allow them to touch their customers in unique ways, like being able to put loyalty cards in there, digital receipts, digital wallet, perhaps targeted advertising if the consumer allows it. So we're not just saying, hey, we'll be your credit card processor, but we'll help you sell more, is what we're trying to do. So on eBay, so that's one thing where the world's changing so quickly. So I walk through what's happening in mobile and tablets and online. And what's interesting is eBay Inc., PayPal's part of that. We have a lot of leaders especially in retail, who come to us and say, I can't keep up. Our margins of retailer are a few percentage points. I can't afford to have the best computer scientists and the best computing thing, and there are just too many new innovations happening. Can you help me? And that's where we have things like Red Laser and Milo and Where is an app, eBay.com. There's an open source product called Magento that we own for setting up a storefront. We have a whole portfolio, and one of the ways we're differentiating ourselves is we're saying we won't compete with the merchant. We're the infrastructure and technology provider to merchants, service provider, where Amazon is doing that, but at the same time competing with those same merchants. So the merchants don't trust Amazon. It's like this love-hate relationship. They know they have to sell through that channel, but they know it's going to come back to bite them. And instead, we're trying to be the industry enabler for commerce and payments.
The banking question is, of course, maybe one of the reasons people don't like American Express or Visa is because they take your money. What is the eventual cost of money for transactions when it's on the internet and there aren't physical transactions or records that have to be physical or anything?
Yeah, I think it is being set now. If you look at the rates of transactions, in the few percentage points, and you have to take into account that has to cover fraud losses, compliance requirements, real processing requirements. So when you all add, those are all real costs, right? There is, there are a lot of bad guys out there, and they need to you need to constantly be investing in your infrastructure. But that's where it also varies depending on the type of payment vehicle that you're using. So for example, if somebody puts a credit card in their digital wallet at PayPal, the credit card networks still charge us. So we can't arbitrarily lower that. If we can get them to do other vehicles like bank payments or balance, then it's much less expensive. And we count on a blend, so we can offer a lower rate. We just count on a blend so we can actually be competitive there. But I think over time, like anything, it's going to drop. Yeah. It's just inevitable.
What are you doing to displace like retail kind of like purchasing experiences where it's physical? Because I don't think, I mean, I've seen PayPal online everywhere, but I don't think I've ever seen it in a physical location.
If you go to the Home Depot, we are fully integrated with the Home Depot point of sale. And so what you do is ahead of time, for security, you have to enable it, your PayPal account to accept offline transactions. But you can go up now, like I did it the other day. I had my daughter on my shoulders, phone in my pocket, and it was just mobile number and PIN at the pad. I didn't have to pull out anything. So we're doing that, and we're at Abercrombie and Fitch and Home Depot, and we've got a whole bunch of merchants lining up that we're integrating with. Additionally, we announced a deal with Discover, and so later next year, we're going to be able to be accepted in pretty much every retailer in the U.S. With that, time for one more question, or are we here in the back?
So, sort of a follow-up question to the earlier question about fraud. So I've heard that credit card companies actually make money from frauds when it reaches like to a certain level. So can you sort of comment on that and compare that with PayPal?
I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that they make money from fraud. I'm trying to think of how they might do that. Any other color on how they make money on fraud?
Handling or resolving the fraud is one aspect of how they actually go on getting the money from the merchants.
Yeah, I see. So if everything, what you could say is certain fraud loss rates are baked into their pricing scheme. So if they could lower their fraud rates or lower their costs, then they're going to make more profit off of a particular transaction. And there might be some ways that I'm not creative. Fortunately, I'm in the technology area, and I get to play with like computer systems and scaling and other pieces. So that particular dimension of pricing, I'm not familiar with.
One more
All right.
question. How are you handling unbanked countries where it's a cash?
Mm-hmm.
That is the
Sure. So one of the benefits is we can have people who are unbanked be able to create PayPal accounts. As long as we can meet compliance and regulatory requirements. So there are some restrictions to fight money laundering and other activities. And then we also have different products. So in the U.S., credit is very prevalent. In Europe, for example, debit cards are much more preferred. In Asia, cash is much more preferred. And we're coming up with different solutions for those different areas. Say the cash one is one we're still innovating on, and I think that's where there's this opportunity for how could we create maybe a more convenient and safer way of doing payments. Like I've seen some really cool stuff in our labs where you can just do payments and even anonymous payments through different vehicles. In fact, our hackathon, somebody came up with a pretty creative way of doing just cash payments using the camera. Okay, great.
With so many innovations that you are having to examine, research, consider, how do you select the ones that you are working on?
So what we do is a portfolio approach. So the way I like to think of it is like 70% in the core business of what we're primarily, it's very clear what we're trying to shoot for. We go after it, and then about 20% is on things that are maybe specific to a particular country or adjacencies or new businesses that already have legs, and then about 10% on innovation. So being able to invest in early ideas, ideation, and the best thing possible is not to try to do innovation on the side, but get those innovative ideas incorporated into those front and center projects. And so that's where you've got to protect innovation, but you can't do so much innovation that you don't invest in your core business. And it's really a portfolio approach to it.
Just one last question. You've got 40 students, PhD master's students in the room and some professors. not everything can happen at PayPal that you want to happen. So is there some dream you have for what we should be doing and how that would help?
Yeah, you know, actually, I welcome that. If there was a way where, like we have particular research areas where, like big data, for example, we're investing heavily there, and maybe there's some algorithms that could be developed, or we're doing some things with infrastructure or OpenStack. So not knowing the focus areas here, I think absolutely, and we've got ECTA who could work and say, because pretty much I run and see everything soup to nuts that a technology shop can run. So it's from data centers, data center processing, to analytics, to high performance transaction computing, modern web development, mobile, blah, 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 blah. And so it'd be great to know what are some focus areas of the professors or students here. And then,
All of the above.
Okay, great, yeah. And then is there an alignment in something that's real? So what I prefer is it's a real project for us, and it's a real interest here. And that's where I think we could potentially have some interesting research, because I'd love to get the brain power and the vision in more of a greenfield view. Okay, and with that, I've got to wrap up. So it's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'd love if there's a follow-up opportunity with that. That'd be fantastic.
Thank you very much, James.
Sure.
That was really great. Appreciate it. I think Gladys would like that skate to where the puck is, too. So for the raffle, for those of you who have your names entered in here, do you want me to draw or you can draw? Okay, you draw. No peeky. Okay, now read the name.
I can.
Johnson Piao.
We have about 10 minutes that he can join us for cookies and stuff, but that's it. So,
Okay, so
beyond the hall.
Okay.
PayPal is managed to bring a gift for the lucky winner. You want to stand up? And then we'll just pass it to you. And you want to tell them what it is?
I think they know. It's an iPad. But we're asking that you all apply online for jobs. ebayoncampus.com.
You have to graduate first.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And there's opportunity outside for some cookies and what have you, and more chatting if you would like. Okay? Thanks a lot.